and welcome back. In the last video, we imported the INI files into the config utility, and we sorted them so that we were able to see what we were up against for adding new tables into our database. This video is going to deal with how to parse that information and how the settings work for certain toys that are connected to your output board. The first thing we're going to need to do is open our file generator and go to our information that we imported. Now we selected the Dukes of Hazzard table, and as we go across we can see where the settings are. Now when I set up this sheet, I set it up in such a way that all of the columns line up with the information that you're going to need for each of your outputs. And to make it a little easier for you to keep track of what it is that you're doing, you can scroll up on the screen so that I guess scroll down to affect it, but you can line it up so that your highlighted Dukes of Hazzard table is right under the headings. Makes it a little clearer for you to remember what it is that you're working with. Now, if you notice on the top row, each of the column headers is set up with an associated color. Those colors correspond to the color channels of the LED controllers for each one of those outputs. So in the case of the start button, it's green. That's because it's on the green channel of the LED control chip that is running the output. Remember that the TAO system converts all of your outputs to a continuous stream of serial addressable information. So with things like the start buttons, the flashers, the strobes, and your undercab LEDs, all of those are done on 3 channels. For things like your shaker, your gear, your beacon, and all the solenoids that follow that, they're all on the red channel of each individual control chip. That was done purely for technical reasons because those outputs didn't play nicely if you tried to triple up on each chip with an individual solenoid. They would cancel each other out. So in the case of your start button, what the information here indicates is that the start button is going to be on. It's not going to blink. It's not going to do anything fancy. It's just going to be on and steady. What actually goes on behind the scenes is that the command for that would be on L green AT0. We don't need to worry about adding the L green AT0 because the spreadsheet will automatically do that for us as we enter information into the config editor. When we look at the launch button, we see that it's got a blink function. Well, we don't use the traditional blink function coding, so we're going to delete that out, and we're going to get rid of the space at the end of the switch number. We want to keep the switch number only. Extra spaces can cause exception errors in your DOF configuration when it's loading, and enough exception errors, DOF will just ignore loading that configuration for that table. So you always want to make sure that you just end on the information, no extra spaces. Undercab lighting is going to be 100% just copy and paste into the config tool because it's already set up in an RGB arrangement. And as we scroll across, we see for the beacon that we have multiple information entered here. Anything that's separated with a backslash means that it's 2 separate switches with 2 separate settings in order to trigger individual effects for those switches. Now what we want to do is, because the first switch has the information of M1000, which is turn on the beacon for a minimum of 1 second, and max 10,000, which means make it run for a maximum of 10 seconds. We want to enter in that the beacon, which is, as we can see here, a red output, we want to enter in before the M1000 L red, and that's L capital R and lowercase ed, AT0, which is basically just telling it to put it in the left corner of the matrix, which the matrix doesn't actually exist in this case, but it puts that output in a consistent spot for us so it always works. And then we want a space before the M1000. For the S11 switch, we don't need to do anything because the spreadsheet is automatically going to put in the LRED AT0 for us at the end of it. So at this point, we can go over to our fan, and we see that the change that we made was saved in the column previous to it for the beacon. Our fan is 0, we're not using it. The knocker being S15, I60, we just need the switch number. So we can delete the I60 and make sure that we've deleted any space before the I60 between the S15 and the I60, because we want to end on the 5 in S15. If we come over to the sling, to the flipper left, it's S48, everything's fine there, there's no space. S46, there's no space, and it's a good idea to check for these spaces, because there are errors in the config tool where those spaces exist, and when you go and you try and translate it over by copying and pasting, it's just going to copy that space and cause you exception errors in the load of the table. When we get to sling L, we see that there are 2 switches, but there's no fancy commands involved with anything. In the case of the serial addressables, you want to remove that backslash and replace it with the vertical pipes, which is the shift / key over the enter key on your keyboard. What the pipes give you is an OR condition, which means that when DOF loads the information, it's going to see that you want that output to fire if S14 or S17 trigger. For sling right, the same thing. 2 switches, no extra information. We just turn around, get rid of that slash, put in the pipe. For the bumper middle left, we get into the same thing. We have S7, and then we have this @t@. That's a global setting set by DOF, but it doesn't apply to serial addressable settings. So we delete that out, and we come back to the slash, and we enter a new set of pipes. Now that's telling DOF switch 7, W25, W26, or W27. Those are the conditions under which you're going to trigger that output. That's basically what you're going to go through on the entire string of information. Same thing here. You're going to take care of it by replacing it with a pipe. You're going to make sure you're at the end of W30, and you're going to delete out everything else. Same with this one. You're going to replace the slash. You're going to delete out the space and the @t@, and you're going to just delete out the slash, and you're going to replace it with a pipe. And at the end of the line, you're going to delete out the information there, and you're going to carry on. And we just go across the line, making sure that the information that we've got is going to match what we need for serial addressable. So once again, if you have a slash and two switches and no extra information on the switch, as in conditions like how long it's supposed to run or what the maximum is for it to run, then we can just delete the slash and replace with a pipe. That finishes that line. We're just going to save it so we don't lose our changes. And that is how you parse the information for the individual settings for the screen. What we would do then is we would come back to our dashboard and we would open Add New Table. The Dukes of Hazzard table doesn't exist in our database right now. So what we would do is click on Add Table, and under table name, we enter Dukes of Hazzard, make year. It's an original table. We'll put this year's date in. And for ROM name, what we'll do is we'll come back to our spreadsheet, come back to our entry, and we'll grab by copying what the ROM name is, and then return to our Add Table screen and paste it in. That way we know we're using exactly the ROM name that's coming up that the DOF is going to look for. At that point, we click Save, and we see that the ID number has changed to 1425. We don't care what the ID number is. We just want to see it change, because that indicates to us that we've created our new table entry. At that point, we can save the screen, and we can close it out. And if we come back to our dashboard, we then go to our mainboard config editor screen, and it takes a second to load, but when it gets there, if we scroll down, we see Dukes of Hazzard Original 2022. We click on it, we'll click on Refresh Retrieve, and we see that we have a blank configuration. At this point, we decide whether we want to use the table or not in DOF if we're using the ROM filtering. And we come down to the Start button. And once again, Start was on. So we come back to our editor. We enter in on. For launch ball, it was W36. So we come down to launch ball, we enter W36. Basically at this point what we're doing is we're just copying the information straight over Now, W36 was also a flashing entry. So if we want it to be a flashing entry, we're going to enter AFDEN 100. Our minimum for our fade would be AF min 150. For fade max, AF max 250. And our fade range, AF FADE 250. That'll blink our light at a nice even pulse rate when the launch ball button is initiated with the W36 switch. For undercab, it's always just a matter of copying and pasting what's already there into the undercab lighting box. For Zeb's boards launch, we can take a look and we see that it's assigned as 0, which means we're not using Zeb's boards launch. So we just select off. And we just continue copying and pasting. Shaker is empty, but the beacon gear is empty. Beacon has an entry. So we turn around and we come in and we go to the beacon and we paste it. We can come down to the knocker, come across to the knocker entry, and we see that it's S15, so we can copy it and we paste it. We come over to the flipper, same thing. For the flipper left, we copy, we paste. For the flipper right, we copy, and we paste. And if we have a setting for how long we want the flippers to stay on that doesn't match the global setting that we may have set in the cabinet config or the configuration file on the main dash screen, we can enter it in here. So if we wanted to put a global limit or a limit for our flippers for this game to 20 seconds, we would enter 20,000. That means that at any time, if the flipper button is being held on for longer than 20 seconds, it just turns off the solenoids to the flippers anyway. And we would continue down the list, grabbing our information and pasting it into the appropriate boxes. And once we had finished everything that we wanted, we would click Refresh Retrieve. It asks if we want to save the changes. We say yes. And we can save the page. Now, if we go back to just the generic entry, and then we come back in to take a look at our information that we entered, if we refresh retrieve on Dukes of Hazzard, we see that it has so far saved all the information we've entered. We would do the same thing with the import page for the chimes. In this case, on the add-on board, there are no entries, so we just leave them blank. And for the serial addressable page, your INI 30 scratch sheet, what you would do would be to load the serial lighting config editor page. and you would make sure that you're on the Dukes of Hazzard table, which we are. And you see that we have nothing in here except for our undercab lighting. This is a direct copy and paste from column to column. So if we copy, and we paste, and we copy our strobes, and we paste, and we copy our playfield right, and we paste, we copy our playfield left, and we paste, and we copy our matrix. And we paste. And we see that that's the end of it. So once again, we would click on Retrieve Data, Save Data. We would save our changes. And if we want to verify, we can change to a different table. And if we go back to the Dukes of Hazzard table, we see that our information is saved. So we can save that sheet, exit out. And if we go back to the main board config editor, and we load the Dukes of Hazzard table, we see now that our serial addressable outputs are populated as well. So that's how you translate the information from the INI file into your configuration. You create a new entry point in your database using the add table. You save your table that you created and you exit that, and you go into your configuration editor screens and you basically copy and paste the information that you parsed over into the new screen. It's not as complicated as it looks. If you do it a couple of times, it becomes much easier. And that's it. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you have a great day.